tonight. I want to make sure that council knows that there is no action that can be taken tonight, but instead this item is for discussion purposes only. If there is direction that council would like to give staff, please request this be placed on a future study session agenda. Public comment is also welcome for 2 minutes per person. And I will now turn this item over to City Engineer Aaron Holst, who will lead a discussion about transportation concurrency.
All right, I apologize for the delay there, but yeah, tonight we are here to talk about transportation concurrency. So transportation concurrency is just this first introductory slide here. The reference for transportation concurrency is from Gig Harbor Municipal Code, Chapter 1910. So where does transportation concurrency come from? Transportation concurrencies are a requirement of the Growth Management Act of 1990. And the overall goal of that is to ensure that cities grow responsibly without overwhelming their roadway networks. The short explanation of transportation concurrency is the concept of the city's roadway network keeping up with the surrounding growth. So that's kind of the short of it. But maintaining transportation concurrency means that adequate public roadway infrastructure is in place to serve new development as it occurs, or the city has committed resources to building that infrastructure within a period of 6 years. When's transportation concurrency tracked? Transportation concurrency begins to be tracked by the engineering division at the land use phase. So when permits come in at land use is when we typically ask to see for a transportation concurrency application from a developer. And the responsibilities on the applicant or the developer to prove that capacity exists in our system prior to land use approval. So land use or planning permits, as they're often referred to, is not granted until it's proven by the applicant's transportation engineer that this particular development did not degrade our roadway level of service network below what we have adopted through our comp plan. So a little bit of discussion about level of service. Intersection level of service is on a scale of A to F, and just like back in school, A is really good and F is you're sitting in traffic and intersection going through multiple cycles. It's not what we want to see, and it's not our goal as a city. So we have adopted a citywide intersection level of service D or better, except for a few intersections downtown where it's not feasible to achieve that level of service D. So at all other intersections in the city, level of service D or better is required. Level of service is calculated by averaging the associated seconds of vehicle delay at each intersection leg. So sometimes we get a question about, why does it feel like this intersection is failing? Well, we take each intersection and average the delay at each intersection for that calculation. So this is just a chart of what vehicle level of service looks like, and the city's acceptable level of service is A through D, as shown on this slide, with E and F being not acceptable at most intersections in the city. All right, why the PM peak hour? And a little bit of discussion on this. So the PM peak hour is the 1 hour period from 4 to 6 p.m. that has the highest volume of traffic. So that could be any time between 4 and 6. I just threw an example on here. And so at the intersection of Borgen and Peacock, it could be that 4:45 to 5:45 is the peak hour of traffic. Our intersection level of service, that is our standard. It's looked at in the peak hour because that's when we see the highest volumes of traffic. So I came up with this little plot that you see here on the bottom. And although pre-COVID, the AM peak and the PM peak used to be a lot more defined, but after COVID, what we're seeing is kind of a little bit more of a lunchtime peak. So it's a little bit of a flatter curve. There's a lunchtime peak now where we weren't seeing that peak prior, but the PM peak is still certainly our highest volume of traffic at all of our intersections, and we have proven that and identified that through modeling. Okay, the process to prove concurrency, and there's a lot here, but an applicant comes in at land use, they will submit their TIA. The engineering division will review their TIA. And I didn't bring the stack of books, but at the last study session, we go to what's called the ITE manual, and it's thousands of pages of data that the ITE has collected over the years for all different types of land use categories. So that's kind of our reference manual, and that reference manual will give us a prediction for how many trips a particular land use will generate. So it is on the developer to provide that information in their TIA. And then after they do that, engineering reviews it. We send it off to our consultant, who is David Evans and Associates, or DEA. And they run that through our city's concurrency model. That concurrency model comes back and it gives a bunch of outputs, and it shows trip distribution, and it shows how those trips are predicted to travel through our roadway network. After an applicant is granted transportation concurrency, those trips will live in our model, and they live with that particular parcel for a period of time. So it's important because with redevelopments, our concurrency code allows for credit for existing trips, such as with a TI or a change of use. So here's just a graphic that I put together, and it kind of takes you through a generic permit application. So on the left-hand side in the red is a permit application, and in the red maroon teardrop, let's just say that particular project was for 10 trips. The applicant's engineer would submit that TIA that I discussed on the previous slide. And then engineering would review it. And let's just say in this example, we had some discrepancy, and we decided that this development created 12 trips instead of 10, and came to that resolution with the applicant. So moving on from there, we go to the concurrency model run, where we send those trips to David Evans and Associates. They run that through our model, and we get the report back, and most of the time it passes, and those trips are reserved with the parcel. And that takes us to concurrency approval. We issue a certificate of approval, and those trips live in our model. And so after that, how this is all kind of associated to building permit issuance in the blue teardrop, that is when impact fees are paid, and the city uses those transportation impact fees to build transportation projects. And that is how this all kind of ties back to growth paying for growth. And in this example, the 12 trips multiplied times our existing impact fee would be $90,924. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty here with PowerPoint. Sorry, 1 second here. Thank you. All right, so I have a couple examples here. So this example's for a subdivision. To make the math easy, I just assumed 106 homes on vacant land. So The ITE rate for a single-family detached residence is 0.94. And what that means is, on average, a single-family detached residence generates 0.94 trips during the PM peak hour. So to calculate the total trips for that plat, we would multiply the rate times the number of units. And so the rate, 0.94 times 106, that will give us 100 net new trips in the PM peak hour. And a little example of how that impact fee would be calculated is just per each SFR, single family residence, is 0.94 times the base rate, which is currently $7,577. So each single family residence, we are currently charging $7,122 prior to issuing a building permit. So for the entire subdivision, that number would just simply be multiplied times 100, and you can see that number is on your screen there, but $712,000 the city would use to fund transportation impact fee eligible projects. All right, one more example, and this is of a tenant improvement example. So commercial is calculated somewhat differently. It's usually based on square footage, but there is still that rate from the ITE manual. So in this example, we'll just assume an 8,500 square foot existing industrial park is proposed to convert into a pharmacy with a drive-through. And I just randomly picked these, but lots of examples of them. But so the 8,500 square foot industrial park generated 2 trips. I'll spare you the boring math of that. But the proposed pharmacy, what's important here is the pharmacy that's proposed would get a credit for those 2 trips that were generated by the site previously as an industrial park. So the calculation for the new development is the 4 trips minus the 2 trips that existed on the parcel at the time. So an impact fee in this example for a pharmacy would be those 2 trips multiplied times our base rate. All right, so back to transportation concurrency and kind of the big picture and why does it matter? So it's how the city confirms that private growth is happening concurrently with city transportation projects to support such growth. It ties proposed developments to road improvements. It confirms there's capacity in the roadway network prior to land use approval. It prevents traffic from getting worse, and it ensures private project growth is paying their fair share towards transportation improvements. And with that, I know it's a lot. I put together this presentation with enough information to send it out to City Council to look at, digest, and kind of go through. So I put some examples in there. So I will email this to you after the council meeting tonight so you can look at it and digest it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But I am here to take questions tonight. So.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It was very informative and very appreciated. I would like to move to public comment if there's anybody from the public who would like to comment on this item. And then I will go to questions from council. Is there anyone in the audience or anyone on Zoom who would like to comment on this item? Seeing none, I will move to council. And I have a question before I call on them. I'm taking prerogative. What happens if the business does not have access to a traffic engineer? Can they come to you and ask for assistance with that? I'm thinking of some of our small businesses.
Yes, they can, and that has been our policy. So we have created a client assistance memo for small businesses. So if the predicted trip range is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 4, and we have this all documented that I can send in that same email, they can come to us and ask us to perform the calculation for them.
Great, thank you. And thank you for providing that service too. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you. I got lots of questions. I'll try to keep them short. How long did the TIF credits stay with the parcel? How many years?
So they will stay with the parcel for 5 years if the parcel is actively is active in the use that it exists in. So if there's an active grocery store that's open, that credit exists for 5 years. If something were to close down and it sat there for 5 years vacant, then they would not get that credit for that use.
If there was a business there that had started, they had to buy 10 credits, let's say, and then they went out of business and somebody moves in and only needs 3. Let's say it started out as a restaurant, which I think your models tend to be pretty hard on restaurants based on tables and whatnot. A little higher TIF ratings, and then somebody comes in there, let's say it's a small shop. Do they get a credit, or what happens? What happens to the extra money that was there?
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're asking if there was something there that generated 10 trips and somebody moved in that generates 3, what happens to
Correct.
those trips in excess? Nothing.
What do you mean nothing? They would still pay their 3 TIF?
No, if they had a credit for 10 trips and they came in and were proposing that they would create 3 trips, then they would not pay a transportation impact fee. And there would
Because
still be those extra 7, that delta of 7.
that's because the previous landowner, land use paid the 10, correct?
That is because the previous landowner had paid the TIF fee, yes.
And then one last question, if somebody next to him, talking like a little mall type thing, let's say somebody next door comes in and they generate 6 trips. Does that credit get extended to the next people, or do they pay the full 6, even though these other folks now have, well, they don't have a credit of 7, but I'm just trying to figure out if we're overestimating and charging more for folks that are coming in when we've already gotten the money for, like, say, 10 trips, somebody comes in later, only needs 3, a new business comes in on the left or right of them, they need 5, they get, and there was nothing there before, they get the whole, they have to pay then, right? Trying to see how we're not overestimating, overcharging.
Jeff Lang, I'm Public Works Director. I'll jump in here. Quite often, in your example, a strip mall, there's one owner. That is often left to the property owner's discretion, because it's their property. The train station concurrency is identified through a legal description, which is usually the boundaries of the property. And so the property owner often gets to decide if they have a credit for a strip mall, then and they want to give it to a certain tenant and then they run out, then that's the property owner's decision. And that's leasing, impacts on leasing. I understand that, but that's not anything that we can control. That's something the property owner can control. Otherwise, we would have to be able to break apart. So, I mean, you can imagine a strip mall, one business might come in and take over what was 2 businesses, or divide that to what was 1 business now gets subdivided into 3. We don't get to control that. We leave that up to the property owner.
Yeah, and in that example, we track that internally. The engineering department tracks that internally in those types of examples.
Councilmember Wook.
Thank you. Great presentation. I look forward to getting these slides. So I have 2 questions. Is there a list of intersections that are rated E and F?
Yes.
And can we get a copy of those intersections?
Yes, it's in the transportation element that
Okay.
was just approved as part of the comprehensive plan, but I can certainly send the link to
That's
it.
right. I can look there and find it if that's what
Okay,
it is.
great.
Okay. So we talked about 106 detached homes. What happens if those 106 housing units are part of a development, multifamily development?
Yeah, multifamily has a completely different trip generation rate, so it's lower typically. It is lower for all multifamily. So the ITE has a quite a number of different classifications for multifamily development. So each one of them is very descriptive and has each use has a whole page of description so that we as engineers or traffic engineers, it's very clear what type of multifamily and how how to assign the correct rate to that type of multifamily, whichever is being proposed.
Okay, so that's governed by the book.
Yeah, it's governed by the ITE manual, which is based off of years of data collection from similar types of development.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilmember Ekberg.
Thank you, Aaron, for the presentation. You can tell it's a very complicated issue. So we're sitting here going through that, and my thoughts are just on a small business and how they navigate through it. The mayor stole my first question, which was great. But my next question is, are there other areas in there that you see or opportunities where we can make this process easier or more streamlined for smaller? It makes sense to me for large developments that this is important, but on those small remodels, reuses, what can we do to make this more efficient?
Yeah, I mean, we can always do better, but I think what we could do is promote that our existing client assistance memo that I mentioned. So we could take a look at that, update it, and kind of make sure it's at the right place on our website. Have it at the front counter. We could get the word out there through a number of different mechanisms, but we could I could coordinate with Lori communications and get that out there in any number of ways. So
Okay, and second question on that, one single family dwelling, sounds like we got that kind of dialed at 7,100. Do they have to go through the whole thing, or do they just come pay their 7,100?
yeah, usually it's under just our standard type of subdivision. So yeah, it's $7,122, and they come in and pay it. It's tied to their building permit. So yeah, it's just listed there as their fees, and they come in and pay it prior to building permit issuance.
I will add to that, just to clarify, while the payment of the impact fee is that cut and dry, the concurrency is not, because of the need for a transportation impact traffic impact analysis that we run through our model, because that same 106 unit subdivision needs to be inputted into our model so that the model can figure out where the trips are distributed. If the trip is distributed through an intersection that has LOSF or below LOSD and it's not authorized by code to be at failure, the city then turns to the applicant and says, okay, you have just now added a trip to an intersection that will cause it to go into a failed mode, as Aaron has noted. And therefore, we can't grant you concurrency because you have negatively impacted an intersection that has essentially made it failed. So that's where impact fee wise, yes, that's clear cut, but concurrency wise, it's not as clear cut.
So when it's not clear, let's say they came in and your model says it's going to generate 60 trips, and they say that's no way, it's only got to be 40. And they have their engineer with their report. What happens then?
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking to if there's like a conflict between or some sort of discrepancy between what our engineering division's reviewing and the applicant's TIA.
Yeah.
We work together to reach a resolution. So this ITE methodology is the standard way to get there, but our code does allow for other ways to get there. So if it like the ITE isn't perfect. It's just data that's been collected. And it does great for most instances, but if there's something really unique, then our code allows for a developer to come in and hire a traffic engineer and propose a different way to do that, such as in the example of a fast food restaurant, that fast food restaurant could select like 5 or 6 different locations locally and take traffic counts at their entrances and exits during the PM peak hour and prove to us what their peak hour is and how many trips they would propose to generate during the peak hour. So there's a number of different ways to get there if the ITE doesn't work. And that is allowed per our code.
If we were sitting around a table, I would talk. Thank you. Okay. I think that there's a paradox here. The two things are true. We want to provide a transportation network that is free flowing, and also we want to help our businesses. If I hear Councilmember Eckberg, you're not necessarily asking to revise the code, but asking if there's process questions or communication that we can do better to have so that we can communicate it better, so maybe people understand it better, get through the process differently. And I do think that, as Aaron said, we always have room to improve. I think we've done a number of improvements with the business assistance meetings where people are, we're making kind of tenant improvements and small businesses going in downtown, less of a Rubik's Cube, and it's more explainable. And we've heard a number of businesses use that and have that be successful. I think we can maybe use that same model here to kind of demystify TIF. I would like to ask staff to look into that and see if they can come up with some ideas that we can consider for communication and for explaining that to get to what your question was. I do want to just say, I don't know if it's been said tonight, but in terms of concurrency and traffic impact fees, and you probably already know this, but we have to treat a big business similar to a small business based on law. So anything that we would do for a, let's say, fast food restaurant that may generate many, many, many trips, we have to apply the same methodology and law to a smaller restaurant that's going in downtown. There's no federal or state law that would allow us to treat those two differently. So we have to apply the same methodology to a big business or a small business. Also, I know that we're in a more formal situation here tonight, but if we were sitting around a work session table, I would tell you that, you know, staff, I think council are aware that there has been some chatter in the community about a business that indicated that they were being made to pay over $100,000 of traffic impact fees. Unfortunately, the rumor mill really has gotten the best of the community. In this instance, that business did not even submit a traffic impact or chip generation report to engineering. I want to give a special shout out to the executive director of the chamber, Miriam Batson. She did go and talk to that business owner, and we now have branched that process where that business owner will be coming in, and we will explain what that trip generation memo may look like. And it's likely, or it's a potential, that there would not be any trips for that business to extend their operating hours into the 4 to 6 p.m. peak. So of course, we can improve our process. We can always improve our communication. But I appreciate those council members that did reach out and ask, did this really happen? Because in that instance, it did not happen. And it was just really important that the truth in that matter was stated.
Councilmember Coronado.
Thank you very much for your presentation and starting the conversation on this. I had a couple of questions. So, and this is only for private development. This wouldn't pertain to anything like public institutions or schools or anything like that, right?
It does apply to public projects. So example, a sports complex, 1B park project, we paid our fair share of impact fee. So
Okay.
it was a transfer of funds into the TIF program.
Sure. And so the 4 to 6 p.m. window for the PM, that model only looks at that window of time, not necessarily. Is there a way to maybe extend that an hour to get a better vision of what's happening when, is it 6 schools we have in our district, in our city limits? To get a better idea what's happening with our traffic patterns when that is getting out? Because I know that's pretty impactful. That's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people hitting the roads at that time.
Yeah, and we certainly are aware of what we refer to as the school peak, or traffic engineers refer to as the school peak. And Unfortunately, if we designed around the school peak in particular locations, our capital transportation infrastructure budget would just skyrocket. So typically, transportation engineers and local agencies adopt that 4 to 6 hour, which is the PM peak commute hour, and the model has shown to reflect that that is still the peak hour. So we don't typically don't design around a school peak, although we do during periods like we just went through with our comp plan update, transportation element update. We do take 24-hour counts at certain locations to calibrate the model, just to look at how things are balancing out. And that's when you do notice kind of, I mentioned that after COVID, it used to be just this huge AM peak and then it dipped way down and then even bigger PM peak. But now it's just kind of AM and then a little bit of a dip down for during the lunchtime. And then it goes up to your PM peak, which is certainly the highest time of day, but peak related to the volume of traffic, but it's not as high as it used to be compared to
If there was any way we
pre-COVID.
could open that window to like 3 to 6, maybe that would be helpful in my neck of the woods. Also, my next question, how can we, or how does the model maybe represent like multimodal transportation? Or maybe we could some sort of funding source to help with the Cushman Phase 5 trail, if that could be somehow attached to this.
Yeah, how does our model account for multimodal transportation? I mean, with this, we're strictly the ITE data is just based on data that's been collected. So it's already assuming that a certain number of people are taking buses or walking or driving. So that type of transportation is kind of inherently built into the data that we're using from the manual.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Councilmember Coronado, I've heard from other folks that live in your area about the Scansey Rosedale intersection, and now that I have a Gig Harbor High School student, I never knew that that existed before because I never went down that road, and now I know it exists. And so although the TIF money that we're collecting could not be used to pay for an improvement there, we do have the Transportation Benefit District and other funds that could be used to prioritize those projects. So we could have those further conversations collectively to see where those projects would increase. But it's a conversation that I plan to have with the Public Works Director in our one-on-one tomorrow about the state of that four-way stop and what that could potentially do for emergency vehicles or otherwise.
Sure. I know there's a large swath of developable land there on that road as well prior to the jail. And so I wonder how those impact fees might show up in that model or those trip charges.
And just really quick, if I could just go back to your question, if we could go 3 to 6, you could always redefine how your model and how your whole system works, but nationwide, the PM peak hour is 4 to 6 PM. Like when you look at the IT manual, all of the data is based on 4 to 6 PM because that is demonstrated nationally to be the peak hour for commuters. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you. So the comment was made that we have to treat everybody the same, whether it's a Burger King or a Costco or a mom and pop burger stand. And you said there's nothing that would allow us to do that. So I guess my question is, how can we tweak anything if we have no options? I mean, it sounds like we either do this, I don't know if using the ITE trip generation thing is a law that we have to, but I know it's easy. Engineers have been using it for a long time. It's got issues, but I guess I'm trying to get back to, is there any hope that we can look at this? Again, I'm back in the small business issue that perhaps the 5 trips that you're charging a mom and pop because they're paying sales tax, is that the same impact? I mean, jointly as their contribution to the city versus, say, an attorney's office that doesn't pay any sales tax and may have a 5-trip generation. I know it's black and white, engineers love black and white stuff, but the world doesn't often work in black and white. So is there any room for this, or is it, no, we have to do exactly what this is and we don't have any way to tweak it or make a difference in it?
Well,
I will turn it over to Aaron just to clarify my statement. We cannot treat businesses of different sizes differently. So the process can change. Council can adopt a different level of service, and I think Aaron will explain some of those things. But by law, we're not allowed to say if you're a small business with 5 employees, you don't have to pay the TIF. But if you're Chick-fil-A with 300 employees, you do have to pay the TIF. We cannot do that legally.
yeah, and City Administrator Knudsen is correct that we cannot treat businesses differently. What we can do is we can change what level of service we adopt, but and that's what we have done. I mentioned on previous slides related to concurrency, we have adopted level of service F failing in the downtown corridor as being acceptable. But that doesn't change that if somebody came in and had 1 trip that they need to pay for or 2 trips that they needed to pay for, they would still have to pay that impact fee. But what we have control over is adopting a different level of service, either citywide or in different areas of the city.
And then I can add a little bit to that related to businesses paying fair share. You mentioned attorneys that they don't pay sales tax. Council is the one who decides what funds are spent to pay for transportation improvements. Transportation impact fees are just one of those funding sources. Right now, as you probably all very well know, we don't spend general fund money on transportation projects. We have other funding sources, so it's not something that we usually look at. If there's another funding source out there that those types of businesses could pay a tax on, and then that money could be partially spent on streets capital projects, then maybe that's another solution to the funding of some of these transportation projects.
And City Council also sets the TIF rate. So if council is concerned about the amount of a trip, the council does have the authority to reduce the amount of each trip.
And I just want to go back and clarify one thing related to what I said about changing our level of service at intersections in different locations of town. It certainly has to be equitable, and that decision has to be based on engineering documentation that there's essentially nothing, there's like a physical barrier. There's no way that we can improve that intersection. So we can't just select a certain area of town and accept level of service F for no reason. It has to be backed by it being physically not possible to construct.
Did you have additional questions? You still have the, okay. Councilmember Wook.
Yes, thank you. For our folks online, let's go back a little bit to the very beginning. Where did transportation impact fees go? Where does that money go?
Yeah, transportation impact fees go into a pot of funds that the city has 10 years to spend on transportation improvement projects. So we do a great job of implementing transportation projects as a city, in my opinion. But yeah, any project that's on our transportation impact fee eligible project list, that money can go to.
And what happens? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you, Councilman Wook. I was just going to say, and all of those projects are identified in the budget. So if you look through the budget, there is a separate fund of impact fees and it identifies where those projects are going. And then if you look at our streets capital fund, it also identifies where the makeup of the funding comes from. And if you look at a lot of streets projects, those that are eligible do have transportation impact fees, a portion of the funding source for the entire project.
And what happens if those funds are not collected?
If the transportation impact fee funds weren't collected, we would be having to seek out other sources of funding, such as grants or other internal revenue sources.
And what would internal revenue sources be?
TBD, HBZ, general fund.
So we know that our general fund is sometimes a little light, and that's where we pay all of our staff from. So hopefully we don't take money there. We need to use that money for other things. So it sounds to me that transportation or traffic impact fees are pretty important for keeping our city functioning. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Coronado.
And just kind of on the same line there. So these funds could be used to build the Cushman Phase 5 as kind of a mitigation to traffic.
Yeah, I believe so. Let me double check, but I believe that the Cushman Trail Phase 5A is on the list of impact fee eligible projects.
Okay, does that still hold like a park designation? So is there any conflict there?
I'm sorry, I missed that part about the
Does the
park.
Cushman Trail hold a park designation, like parkland? And so would there be a conflict there at all as part of like traffic mitigation or anything like that?
No, I don't believe so. So I think that with current legislation, that Cushman Trail Phase 5A is an impact fee eligible project. I need to double check that and get back to you, but I will.
And so with the traffic impact fees, could the council designate a portion of those impact fees to go to a Cushman development fund?
Could we hold on to funding and kind of set it aside for a Cushman Trail Phase 5 development fund?
Some sort of percentage of,
Well, yeah, I mean, we have 10 years to spend the funds, so we can choose whatever we want to do with them as long as we spend them within that 10 years and we're spending them on the impact fee eligible project list.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, that would take council prioritization of the project. We wouldn't necessarily set up a separate fund for that, just because all of that money has to go into the TIF fund that it stays with. I would encourage any of you, you could sit down with Aaron and go through when we're looking at projects. I might say this wrong, but it's really interesting how we cannot. Well, let me back up. So Nolan v. Dolan is a Supreme Court case that basically said that a government can only charge a proportional share of the impacts. And that's where impact fee legislation comes from. We can't charge a property owner something that is higher than their proportional share of the impacts to the infrastructure. So if the city knows, for instance, that we want a hunt over crossing, we can't make a developer that would only have maybe a few trips of that hunt over crossing pay for the entire thing. That's an over exaggeration, but just for illustration purposes here. So when this concurrency model shows which developments spit out however many trips, that also then goes into how are we going to pay for it? And there's a process and a calculation that engineering does when they're determining how much of the total project cost can be paid for by transportation impact fees or transportation benefit district. And then what other funds come along with that, because we cannot charge or utilize TIF funds to pay for TIF ineligible projects. It's a whole other calculation that they have to do. So it's pretty complex, but if you're interested, they would be more than happy to kind of run through what that looks like for you. And that's really important because if we're using TIF money, which we are not and have not, but if a jurisdiction were to use TIF money on a TIF ineligible project, the city's opening itself for pretty substantial liability. And so we have all of that documented with the analysis of, when you look at the budget, you will see like 38th Avenue, there's a certain percentage of that that is TIF eligible because it's growth paying for growth. But also we had to use TBD money in there, and we have two TBDs, right? One that's for streets between fog line to fog line, and then one that we can use for other improvements now that council passed last year. And so we have to be very careful when we're determining which money can go towards which project, and we have to be able to defend that. So it's sort of a long answer to your question, but this is a really complicated thing that they do.
And am I correct that our TIF money is generally allocated well before we get to the 10-year limit? I'm not sure I'm wording that correctly, but I think you know what I mean. We don't have excess money
You are
that we're
correct.
jeopardizing.
You are correct. The way our TIF funding works and our accounting works is the first dollar in is the first dollar out. So we continuously take money in, but we're never sitting there holding the money for that long. That bank, if we were to hold that money, would be enormous, and we keep spending it on other projects.
And that money is allocated to projects that that council has prioritized as being high need.
Correct, through the budget process.
Thank you.
And we are not in full cost recovery, as was noted tonight. The TIF is, I think, 75% of what the total would be in order for it to pay for everything. So the city is already making an assumption that about 25% of that will be paid for by setting the TIF rate at what it is today.
And I do apologize. I have to correct myself. So the Cushman Trail Phase 5, due to current legislation, could not be on the impact fee eligible project list. I was thinking about the Hunt Street Crossing, which is on the impact fee eligible project list, but due to current legislation, it could not. And the way we have set this up, the Cushman Trail Phase 5A is not and could not be on the project list. Apologize for that.
Thank you. Wow, what a discussion. Does anybody have anything to contribute to this? I really appreciate your work on this, Aaron and Jeff. It is extremely helpful.